Hello, welcome to Chez Eric. I am Dr. Eric. I'm a psychiatrist who happens to be religious, and I am a psychiatrist who is focusing on high performers who want to maintain a spiritual connection with a higher power. This is Chez Eric. It's French for my home, well, this is my office, and this is a place where we talk about psychiatry and religion. So why psychiatry and religion? Why are we talking about psychiatry and religion? What happens when we combine psychiatry and religion? Why am I creating an entire YouTube channel on psychiatry and religion? We're going to go very, very, very deep into the topic of why I believe psychiatry and religion can help improve your life. So as an overview, we will be talking about 5 different topics. The first topic is going to be talking about what is psychiatry. The second topic is going to be talking about what is religion, or at least how we're going to be using religion in our current conversation. The third topic will be talking about a history of psychiatry and religion as they interact with each other. The fourth topic is going to be about the current state of psychiatry and religion and religiosity in the world or in the country, at least in the US. And finally, the fifth topic is going to be my take on understanding how psychiatry and religion, when brought together, can really help improve your life. So in the first part of our talk, we're going to ask the question, what is psychiatry? What is the practice of psychiatry? How is it different from other things like psychology? Are they the same thing? Neurology? Or is it all just dealing with the brain? How does all of this fit? Because I feel like a good understanding of the history of what happened in the past is definitely going to help us understand where we are today and how it can definitely help you today. Psychiatry as a practice really kind of started in the 1800s. Mental health illness was in the 1800s, where we didn't have a lot of tools to help people suffering from schizophrenia, where you hear a lot of voices or are very paranoid or have disorganized behavior, or bipolar disorder, where you have manic episodes and depressive episodes. People were sent to asylums, and there really wasn't a lot of outpatient psychiatric care at the time. Fast forward to the 20th century, we have Freud coming into the play, and he demonstrates, or makes a very good case for the presence of a subconscious, for an unconscious understanding of why we do what we do. And his general clientele are going to be fairly wealthy people who have money, who suffer from a lot of anxiety, and he built his construct of his psychoanalytic and psychotherapeutic dynamics for this mental health space. In the 1950s and 1960s, we began having new medications that could actually help the people who were suffering from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And when we used to put them in asylums and we put them in sort of houses where we couldn't do anything for them, we found that they were getting better, they could get cured, and they could be sent to outpatient, and that started the deinstitutionalization of the mental health facilities that used to hold people for long-term care. In the 1980s, we began having a DSM criteria, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, as created by the APA. And this manual was meant to create a common language among mental health practitioners so that we could have a criteria to understand and bin people in places so we can better understand what's going on. The challenge was that psychoanalysis, as previously understood, when Freud was creating it, wasn't really specific enough, and everyone could kind of just do their own thing. So the DSM created a standard language for people to talk about depression and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And in that way, we can then move forward with research and understanding the etiology behind things, and that is the push for the DSM. Afterward, there was quite a bit of pharmaceutical innovation around the 1980s. And this is where a new class of antidepressants, known as the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, came about to help people with their depressive symptoms. And we also had second-generation antipsychotics, such as Zyprexa, also known as olanzapine, and risperidone, also known as Risperdal. These are the things that actually help people a lot because they didn't have as many side effects. These antipsychotics didn't have as many side effects as the original first-generation antipsychotics. During this time, psychologists began championing the use of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And this would be standardized in manuals and would be more rigorously studied than the psychoanalytic method that we used before. By the year 2000, the we found that there were new side effects, or we're uncovering side effects of the medications, such as discontinuation syndrome or increased suicidal behavior with antidepressants, and then with the antipsychotics. With the second generation, we found metabolic syndromes where people were getting overweight or eating more and things like that. So the problem now arose where these pharmaceutical drugs were, they were helping society at first, but then we found that there were side effects, and it started coming under heavy fire in the public. And then we found that with millions of dollars spent in the pharmaceutical industry for psychiatry, it didn't really help us improve our understanding of the actual diseases that were underlying it. And then around 2013, we had the DSM-5, because we transitioned from the DSM original to version 2, version 3, version 4, and now DSM-5 was a major push to have more evidence-based understanding of psychiatric illnesses so that we can better understand, how to categorize them, how to understand them, and instead of sort of just a simple descriptor of what's going on. It was criticized for having a very medical/biological bias and expanding the scope of disorders to include things that we might consider normal, but that is kind of a short history of psychiatry in a nutshell. And psychiatry in our current day has a lot of changes, and there are a lot of new drugs coming out, and there are a lot of new advances coming out as well, and our understanding of the brain and how it relates to our behavior is advancing as well. However, nowadays I find that people barely understand the difference between psychiatry and psychology, and they lump it into the same sort of things. Like, I see my psychiatrist/psychologist. Like, no, they're very two different things. I have a video on the difference between psychiatry and psychology, but very quickly, psychiatry people they go to medical school and they learn how to, prescribe drugs, and they help with people's mental health disorders. And psychologists typically go through a psychological school, and they get either a master's or PhD, and they learn either clinical work or research work to learn the theories of the mind to help with typically in a therapeutic setting, a therapy setting where you meet someone regularly, either every single week, every 2 weeks, possibly every month. But for our purposes, what is psychiatry? It has a fairly long history. Psychiatry, in my view, is simply psychology plus biology. So we have psychology, the understanding of the human mind, and then we have an understanding of biology, right, where we understand the human brain, its structure, its chemical receptors, and the things that cause us to go awry, whether it's PTSD or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And the more we understand both the combination of the psychology and the biology, the more we can understand why people do the things that they do. And so for our purposes, I believe that when we're talking about psychiatry, we really are talking about both biology and psychology combined together. So that's psychiatry in a nutshell. So we just talked about what is psychiatry, and it makes a lot of sense to talk about what is religion. Now, religion is a fairly complex topic because it includes many, many aspects of human experience. There's a cultural aspect to it, there's an organizational aspect to it, there's a personal aspect to it. What is religion for our purposes for this video series or a video essay or a documentary thing? I don't know what to call it, okay? So, William James, if you're familiar with my content, I had a whole entire lecture series on William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience. And he talks about the difference between institutional versus personal religion. And when it comes to the institutional versus personal religion, William James doesn't really care much about the institutional religion. He cares more about the personal religion. And why is that? Well, when it comes to personal religion, that is the space where people really engage with a personal sense of God and experience with the divine. And he says that the institutional aspects of religion really derives from really great people who have really intense personal experiences with God, such as saints or mystics or things like that. And all the institutional stuff is a derivative of the personal. So he spends his entire lecture series only really talking about the personal aspects of God. And I think we should do the same thing. I think that when it comes to understanding the intersection between psychiatry and religion, we're going to need to focus on the personal experiences of religion and see how psychiatry can either lend support or lend clarity to that religious experience. And vice versa. How can a religious experience lend support and help to understanding our mental health? Because ultimately, your journey is a journey towards a divine being, if that's a journey you want to take. And we do this because it's a personal journey. If it was just an abstraction, it wouldn't really mean very much. Traditionally, psychiatry has kind of looked at the religious experience and kind of stepped back. Like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't really want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, right? However, for our channel, for Chez Eric, PRL, Psychiatry, Religion, and Life, it is a space, it is a home, it's a place that I'm creating to talk about psychiatry and religion, to go deeper, to focus on how to help you improve your life. So we have a clear outline of what is psychiatry, and we have a clear outline of what is religion. So what exactly happened with psychiatry and religion that they're not really coming together? They're not peanut butter and jelly. They're not chocolate and peanut butter. I guess everything goes with peanut butter, all right? They're more like avocados and watermelon. Does that go together? I don't know. But the idea is that psychiatry and religion seem to be trying to help the same person in a very similar way, but they don't really talk to each other. And why is that? Well, back before we even had any medications to help patients suffering from very severe mental illnesses like bipolar or schizophrenia, we really just had to deal with them and just put them in asylums, if you remember. And if we go back to, say, biblical times, what could you do to somebody who was suffering from this illness and acting very disorganized and bizarre? There's a myth that in the past we misunderstood these illnesses as only demon possession. But the truth is that even back then, people kind of had a sense that there was a difference between demon possession and mental illness. That even the clergy or physicians or family members would say, no, this is not a demon thing. This is something else that's going on. For the purposes of our understanding of psychiatry and religion, we're going to focus on a history of European and North American history, and because that really significantly shaped the landscape of psychiatry. So we just want to put that caveat there. When it comes to, say, the historical understanding of the Bible, as it relates to madness, right? The Bible recognizes that there are differences between madness and demon possession, right? And early church writers oftentimes, viewed them differently, and they often, incorporated spiritual perspectives with understanding when someone's acting very bizarrely, and they also acknowledged that something else could be going on. In the Middle Ages, a book called the Leech Book of Bald. It was 3 books owned by a dude named Bald, B-A-L-D. I guess he was a physician, and it actually highlighted a difference between madness and spiritual possession or demon possession. And they had sort of remedies for it as well. So this idea that we were misunderstanding, all mental illness as just demon possession is actually wrong. We had some inkling that there was something else going on even back then. In the 17th century, the early Puritans moved towards more a naturalistic clinical approach, right? And we kind of talk less about supernatural explanations of bizarre behavior resulting from mental illness, and we just kind of talked about people being mentally ill. And, Puritan writers at the time had sophisticated and practical ways of dealing with people who were suffering from mental illness. In the 17th and 18th century, philosophers and physicians began thinking of the soul in less religious terms and more in universal philosophical terms and scientific ones as well. And, those treating mental illness began separating religious causes from other causes. By the 18th century, the Enlightenment, permeated through medicine. The Enlightenment period permeated through medicine, and there was Reformation with religious change all over Europe. And they created sort of therapeutic and custodial, solutions to people suffering from mental illness. And there were both religious and secular reforms. By the 19th century, psychiatric disorders resulting from supernatural causes completely vanished. And this is kind of around the time where Freud came about with his theory on, the subconscious and the unconscious mechanisms of why people do what they do. And then in the 19th and 20th century, there was more of a focus on heredity and biology, and the number of psychiatric hospitals increased dramatically. And then William James came about with his understanding of varieties of religious experience, and Sigmund Freud came out with his book, the seminal book that I did a series on the future of an illusion, which explained his perspective that all of religion is just an illusion and it's just meant to appease people's inner anxiety overall. So Freud was not a very big fan of religion overall, which then created the divide between those who pursued religion and those who pursued the psychoanalytic thought, and they didn't really talk to each other. And as a result, even though they're trying to help the same person, they had two different understandings of how the world works. Whereas the psychoanalytic people believed that religious thought was going to be archaic and silly, religious thought that they were wrong, and then, well, big fight, no one really talks to each other. And now, in the later part of the 20th century that we're in right now, psychiatry generally focuses a lot on the neurosciences and cognitive psychology, and there really isn't much integration of religion. And, there is some acknowledgement of the benefits of religion in psychiatric practices, but it's not really all that pervasive. And we have a little bit of, I guess you could call it a cold war between psychiatry and religion that I hope maybe we could not have anymore, but a lot has to happen in order for that to occur. So I hope you found it interesting, and then we will now talk about the next topic of where we are now with religiosity and psychiatry. So where are we now? What is the current state of psychiatry and religion? Well, I believe that currently we are in a bit of a state of confusion. And the reason is because there is so much information out there that anyone can research anything and get pretty much any position or idea validated. And in that dynamic, people can kind of do whatever they want. This actually represents a transition from collectivism to individualism, where we are talking about people used to be more part of a collective society, especially when it relates to religion, and more towards now it used to be that way. Now it's more of an individualistic sort of pursuit of religion, and that's what we traditionally would call spirituality outside of a religious organization. And this isn't just some rumor. This is actually research, and the Pew Research Center actually does religious polls on religiosity. And we found that, from 2007 to 2014, there's a smaller share of adults that identify as a Christian, while the religious nuns, meaning people who are not religiously affiliated, has grown. Christians, those who have identified as Christians have decreased from 77% to 65%. And those who were religiously unaffiliated increased from 16% to 26%. There are multiple studies on this. Another one, also from the Pew Research Center, showed that those that were religiously affiliated were still as religious as they were before, but the percentage of them who described themselves as religiously affiliated decreased from 83% to 70-something percent, and the unaffiliated increased from 16% to 23%. The nuns have also, the people who are not religiously affiliated have also become more secular in their practices, as those who are unaffiliated and believe in God dropped from 70% to 61%. And the net result is that those who believe in God in total, not just the religious unaffiliated, dropped from 92% to 89%. And the trend actually continues to 2018. So what's exactly going on? Well, as I just mentioned before, I believe this is a trend from collectivism to individualism. And why do I think that? Well, in the past, religiosity, the religious organization, served a larger purpose to bring large groups of people to organize together with a particular framework. And what religion did is that it provided a moral housing for how we should behave and treat each other. In that dynamic, if the moral housing is good, then the society will be able to flourish. The society will be able to do well. So if you have a society where everyone wants to kill each other and they don't have religion, well, that society isn't going to do very well. But if you have a society that says you should respect your neighbor, you should love your neighbor, you should forgive each other, you are redeemed, you should have a stable family household, that society is going to prosper economically. And the religious center of everyone coming together on a weekly basis to Sabbath and relax and things like that, that creates a social structure where we are all part of a larger collective. And it's always about being a part of a larger whole. Fast forward to now, and this is a really fast forward, we have the internet to allow us to be more individualistic. We have the internet to allow us to hide behind our own little bubble if we want to. We can create and carve out our experiences to only experience the things that we want to see. And as a result, the idea of the individual is having more prominence nowadays. This can be evidenced by Facebook and social media generally with Instagram, where people literally post and show what's happening in their lives on a daily basis if they want. And they become more obsessed with themselves than with other people, and it's really about them showing what they're about, not really interacting with other people. Now, this wasn't meant to be a criticism of social media, but this was meant to point out that we are transitioning from a collectivist mindset to an individual mindset. And with this transition, with the advent of the internet, with more information out there, have we become more enlightened, or have we become more, partisan? And I think it should be fairly clear and obvious with things going on nowadays that we've become more partisan as a result. People are just kind of becoming more individualistic, and we are able to celebrate the individual. Heck, this channel is a celebration of my individualism, trying to reach out to you, and I create this gigantic sort of media brand stuff to say, hey, look at me. Anyone can be an individual putting themselves out there, and you don't need a large production anymore. That's what's happening. So, if people are becoming more individualistic, they're going to seek self-actualization on a very individual level, and therefore, the version of God that they're going to be seeking is going to be individualistic. There's, of course, a plea that, you should be a part of a larger church or a larger sort of dynamic, a larger group. However, we see the trends happening with the Pew Research Center. There's just less people being associated with organized religion and more people being associated with unaffiliated, something more spiritual. And this also comes into play, this concept of all the scandals that are caused and controversies caused by religious organizations. We have sex scandals, bajillions of them. There was one recently by a pastor of some sort, where I won't get into it now. We have, other scams, like cancer scams, where people say, quit your cancer medication and believe only in God and send us $2,000, that will prove your faith. And then they literally rip off hundreds of millions of dollars from people who are desperate for an answer to their biological cancer or, physical ailments, right? And scandal upon scandal upon scandal, when you have the trend of collectivism to individualism, and then you have the religious organizations with scandal after scandal after scandal, what are you supposed to do, right? What is one supposed to do with their religiosity? So, the truth is that, I don't really care, right? And not that I don't care. I don't care about the religious institutions, as I mentioned before. I care about the personal, understanding of religion. I care about you and your journey towards a higher power, and I care about you and your success in your life. And I am creating a small niche for myself where it really is a niche for high performers who want to maintain a spiritual connection to a higher power, because I truly believe that combining psychiatry and religion together and mushing together really creates a very, very strong dynamic to really, really improve your life to ways that you could never possibly believe or imagine before. So that will be talked about in the next part. So this is where we get to what this whole entire video is about. Psychiatry and religion, and why I'm mushing them together, right? Why I truly believe that they really, really work well together. Psychiatry and religion, in my perspective, is really a question of two halves of the same coin. So when we're talking about psychiatry, it is very, 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 very good at getting people from a negative space to neutral. Psychiatry deals very well with pathology because it does a lot of research on pathology. We had the DSM as the manual for when someone has a mental illness, and we put tons of money into helping people with mental illnesses. There was a bit of a push for positive psychology, right, which is the scientific study of what makes life worth living. But this didn't really pan out because there was just so much more money spent on the pathology of mental illness. It began like 1998 with Martin Seligman, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, and he chose that as a theme for the American Psychological Association, but it just didn't pan out. So when it comes to psychiatry and religion, we have psychiatry helping with getting people from negative to neutral. And then I truly believe that religion can help you get from neutral to infinity. And you see this sort of two sort of dynamics. And thus, there are 5 parts to a person. And I've alluded to this in my other videos. You're free to, watch those videos, and I'll talk about it a million times, in the future, okay? 5 parts to a person. And the reason why there are 5 parts to a person is because when we're talking about someone's internal conflict, I've only been able to find 5 areas where there's a conflict. And that if you can find 6 areas, a 6th area where there's a conflict, with an internal conflict with somebody, great, there are 6 parts to a person. And if you could do the same analysis with just 4, or 3 even, that's perfectly fine as well. So what are the 5 parts of a person? The first part is the biology. You want to be able to understand that everyone has a biological part to themselves. And if you remember, psychiatry deals with the biology and psychology. All right, so biology matters. Biology is where everything is housed. Your sleep, your food, your brain chemistry, all right, your exercise, all that matters and actually impacts your life overall. If you do not have your biology set, you are really working with potentially, let's say, a bad car, a car that's broken down. You don't take care of the car, it's rusted everywhere. How are you going to drive a really, really fast race? The second thing is psychology. And with psychology, that deals with everything Freud was talking about. Freud's talking about, the subconscious, the ego, superego, but there are a lot of other famous psychologists as well who talked about how the mind works and how people behave and why they behave the way they behave. And so psychology is a place where you have your defense mechanisms that's kind of stopping you. Psychology is a place where you talk about your past and how it intersects, what your mom did or what your father did, your past experiences, potentially, hopefully not with you, but the reality is that trauma affects, in the past, affects why you do what you do. That would be psychology. Okay? The third part of a person is the emotions, emotional, right? And I separate this from psychology because emotions do a very, very specific thing. In my view, emotions are things that we built up over millions of years of evolution. Although technically I think humans were only for tens of thousands of years, but you get the idea. And that it is meant to close the gap between what we know and what we don't know. So this is a gap, what we know, what we don't know, to produce an action that's conducive to our survival. So if you see a rustling in the bush, it could be a tiger. That's the example I traditionally have. And as a result, you jump away in fear because you don't know what it could be. And as a result, that emotion of fear causes you to jump so that every time you jump, you actually survive because you don't become afraid. If you didn't jump every single time, the 1 out of 10,000 time that a tiger is actually there, you might actually die and there's no point to do it. Of course, if you're walking down the streets of Manhattan and there's a rustling in a bush, it's probably not a tiger, but you're still going to jump. So remnants of your emotional state is still there, and that needs to be understood. Your emotions can very easily conflict with your biology and your psychology. The biological, the psychological, and the emotional aspects is what's needed as the foundation to get you from negative to neutral. All right. So if those are all in check, then you're getting from negative to neutral. But going above this, we get to the last 2 parts of a person. And the last 2 parts is the existential and the spiritual. And you might ask yourself, why are you separating them? What's the difference? All right, I'll get into that. The existential part of you is the part of you that wants to grow. Everybody, every human at least, wants to grow. If you have a cat, and this is the classic example I give you, if you have a cat and you give it food and shelter for the rest of its life, it's going to be pretty happy. Very happy. Not whiny whatsoever. However, if you give a human food and shelter for the rest of its life, it'll want more. If you give a human $2 million, it's going to want 4. Now, some of you might say, no, if I had 2 million, I'll be perfectly fine. Maybe, maybe not. But that usually takes some sort of existential soul searching to recognize what is enough and what is growth on your terms. But I have yet to meet someone who isn't growing and happy with their lives. Or in some respects, you have to answer for this desire for growth. You either grow or you numb your desire for growth. And you can numb your desire for growth with lots of things. There's a lot of things out there that numb you, like distractions, movies, TV, not that those things are wrong, but if that's the area where you just don't grow anymore and you just watch TV for the rest of your life, well, that's your choice. But I don't think that's what high-performing people who want to maintain a spiritual connection with a higher power would do. So that's existential, all right? If you're growing, you're a happy person and you're growing. Finally, the fifth part is the spiritual aspect of somebody. Now, what does that mean? Spiritual is distinct from existential because existential is about your personal growth. And spiritual is about a connection to a higher power, or more specifically, the spiritual is your connection with the world. Because the connection with a higher power will always get you to interact in the world, with the world, in a way that is positively beneficial for the world. And that's because that's what the higher power asks us to do. God asks us to love our neighbors. God asks us to help other people. And when we understand our role in the world and our place in the world, as it relates to our mission that God gave us, then we live very spiritually fulfilled lives. But that can't happen unless you have the other four in place. The biology, the psychology, the emotional, the existential. That's like and you don't need it. You don't need to have a religiosity, but you do need to answer for why are you on this world. And it doesn't have to be a good thing. It could be just, I'm here to make the most money as possible. Okay, that's your thing, that's your thing, that's your thing. And you'll see later whether or not it's truly fulfilling. But for the time being, when you believe that's most fulfilling, you will feel spiritually fulfilled. You won't care about anything else. So that is the 5 parts to a person. So I told you the 5 parts of the person, and we talk about the 2 halves of the coin, but how does this all fit? What is the roadmap of how all of this fits? I'll get to that right now. So you understand now how psychiatry and religion are really doing the same thing. They're 2 halves of the same coin. But what is the roadmap to help you succeed wildly in your life with the knowledge of psychiatry and religion? And so there are 5 steps. 5 steps that I created, okay? Step number 1. You need to understand yourself thoroughly with an understanding of your biology, your psychology, and your emotions. This will reveal the subconscious thoughts and emotions that you have so that they don't dominate your actions. You have to understand your personal biases so they don't distort your sense of reality. That's your very first step. Second step, you have to understand your reality. When you understand yourself, you will then understand your reality by eliminating your biases and understanding and uncovering your true motivations in life. You will then be able to understand reality as it actually is. When you understand reality as it actually is, you can then go to step 3, which is you make high quality decisions on your life. Because the decisions are high quality because they are based on your understanding of reality. If you make decisions based on things that's not real, you can't possibly perform well in life because it's based on something that's not real. I know it sounds obvious, but sometimes it's not obvious because your personal biases are not going to be known by you. You need to understand them. You need to take the time to reflect on what your personal biases are. So that's step 3. You're making high quality decisions based on a true understanding of reality. 4. The higher quality decisions will by definition result in better consequences in your life. It doesn't mean that all the consequences are good. It just means that you chose the consequences and it is your choice. And because it is your choice, you own it and you get to control what happens in your life within the reality framework of what you're living in. And finally, the 5th step, the optional step, is that if you choose, you can choose a journey towards a higher power. And the natural thing to do is to develop a sense of God based on your ego. But if you truly want to connect to a higher power, your understanding of yourself needs to set aside your ego and get replaced by this mystical concept of giving it and surrendering to God. And I want you to be on this journey, whether it's step just 1 through 4, that's perfectly fine. But the final step to truly, truly succeeding in life while maintaining a very high connection, a very strong connection to a higher power, includes these 5 steps. Understanding yourself, understanding your reality, making high quality decisions resulting in better consequences, And finally, you can then choose to follow a higher power if that's your choice. You do these 5 things, you will be a high-performing individual with a very strong connection to a higher power. So what is my offer? Why am I doing all of this? You can do this on your own, all right? I'm not going to stop you. I'm going to help you with these programs, okay? But you could listen. I'm trying to create this video essay to make it so that you could take it and just run with it. Just run with it. But the materials that I create, I hope, will accelerate your path. So instead of taking 5 years, you take 2. Instead of taking 6 months to realize something, you take 1. Instead of taking, X amount of years to learn about certain things, I accelerate it by providing you with tools and insights and perspectives. And some of the content will be free, some of the content will be paid. The reason why I will charge for some content is because I would like to do this as a profession, okay? But aside from that, the reason is because there needs to be a buy-in from you, because for some activities, there needs to be a buy-in from you. You need to put money down for it to actually work. So for example, if I gave free therapy to everybody, everyone would literally sign up for the therapy and literally not show up and not be invested in it. And the money will of course help pay for certain things, but it'll also build the larger structure of Chez Eric, Psychiatry, Religion, and Life, which is a space where we talk about psychiatry and religion with a focus on how to improve your life. And for now, I'm focusing on high performers who want to maintain a strong connection with higher power. So where are you right now, and how can I help you? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video.